I think we can go ahead and get started now. Thanks for joining us for the union tutorial session, the second half. Our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Haggerty of the University of Massachusetts Department of Geological Sciences, and he's going to be talking to us about the geopolitical setting of conflict diamonds, which should be quite interesting. Let me just tell you briefly about Dr. Haggerty. He was born in South Africa and educated in England. He received an associateship of the Royal School of Mines and Economic Geology in 1964, a diploma from Imperial College in Exploration Geology, and a PhD from the University of London in Geology and Geophysics. He received a Doctor of Science in 1988 from the University of London. He's a Carnegie Fellow, a Fellow of the Mineralogical Society of America, an AGU Fellow, and a Fulbright Fellow. His research interests are mineralogy and the geochemistry of diamond deposits worldwide, with a particular emphasis on West Africa. Dr. Haggerty.
Thank you very much, Steve. I've always said that the most interesting thing about one's CV is what's not written, okay? So you have to read between the lines. Thank you very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, a great honor to give one of these tutorials. And whereas one is always battling for time, to be given the liberty of the time that I have is really quite an honor. So let's see if I can even keep within that time frame. The first point I want to make is that are my conclusions, and my conclusions will go without words. Namely that they are a set of photographs taken in West Africa. And I spent a decade between 1977 and 1987 on 15 field trips throughout West Africa. I was incarcerated twice, and anyway, that's another part of the story. But it's not so much as to give you, to validate at least what I'm going to tell you about, but to say that in these final few photographs is that it has to be self-evident that we as a scientific community have an indebtedness to society, that as far as I'm concerned there's perhaps a personal vendetta out there, but I'm certainly committed to finding a way to identify diamonds from these conflict areas, at least to satisfy myself and hopefully to make a contribution to society, namely that this has to be curbed. And in spite of the elections, liberal and as democratic as they appeared on the front pages of last week's newspapers, what is happening in Sierra Leone are events that we've seen before, and I'm not a betting person, but I would guarantee that this is a short-lived event, and that the Revolutionary Front will return in very short order. And the same applies to Angola. You know, the point that I want to make on this opening overhead is that whereas we're dealing with perhaps, and let's look at the last conflict part, we're dealing with perhaps 4% of the diamond inventory out there. Industry has long recognized that about 20% of diamonds have been routinely smuggled out of legitimate legally operating enterprises, so that effectively what we're looking at is no longer the 4%, but in fact is 24%, which means that if industry is to brand the other 76% of diamonds by some process that we'll hear more about tomorrow, then this amounts to at least 100 million stones per year, and depending on where one puts the cut for the carriage, is that this is an enormous number, and in my view is really beyond a reasonable expectations for the next few years. But we'll hear more about the last part from Jim Shigley in particular. What's important to appreciate in all of this then is the opening statement, namely that there are only about 50 primary deposits that are actively being mined, but this number increases by a factor of 5, perhaps an order of magnitude, when one takes into account the secondary deposits that are very easily mined by pick and shovel and by jigging. The amount of money involved is really unknown, going back to the last part on conflict diamonds, but a conservative estimate is that we're looking at about $240 million a year coming out of this conflict enterprise. Okay, so let's move on then to looking at some of the characteristics of diamonds. What I would like to do is to at least give a global overview of what we know about diamonds, what we have considered at least reasonable models for the origin of diamonds. And I'd like you to bear this in mind, at least in preparation for the session tomorrow, where people of the likes of Steve Shirey, for example, will be talking about the ages of diamonds. Larry Taylor, Nick Sobolev, and colleagues will be talking about the chemistry of inclusions in diamonds, and Jeff Harris and others will be talking about the coloring diamonds, for example, as we have here. And please note the striations on the uppermost part of the naturally occurring diamond on the right, and so this is due to deformation. So we'll hear more about all of these features in the session tomorrow, in the hopes that there is a characteristic feature among these that will allow us to identify diamonds from a particular deposit. Now, I need to point out also, and it may be obvious to this audience, but it certainly was not evident at the January the 11th meeting that we had in the White House last year. And the point that I want to make is that there is no place on earth, and I've been challenged there is possibly one, but I won't tell you where it is just yet. There's no place on earth apart from an oceanic continental contact where a geological boundary, a contact, I beg your pardon, does not correspond to a geological contact. So don't ponder too heavily upon that. You can stay awake tonight and think about it. But just so the point to be made then, if we could walk up to a geological contact, and if that were a boundary, a political boundary, then we could at least draw some lines in the sand, put up fences, and we would be well on our way to at least identifying that particular source. Now, the newspapers and incidences related to the diamond industry have graced, perhaps that's not quite the term to use, but certainly have been a popular item in the news, ranging from stones of fire, scientists finally counterfeited a perfect diamond, De Beers gets taken for an ice bath, cool, and a $5 million red diamond was mailed in a 50-cent package. But that has changed very dramatically to this news item, thousands of bloodshed in Liberia. This was from the Boston Globe on the 10th of May of this year. And if you turn your head around, might help to get rid of the coffee and wake up. It says Sierra Leone's 2001 diamond exports are up 150%. Russia bans uncertified Sierra Leone rough. Nick Sobolev, wake up. The Congo signs onto the Kimberlite process, and Angola. So here, this is all from the Rappaport News, and this was the 3rd of May 2002. So the style of reporting is now very different on diamonds from what it was perhaps a decade ago. Where do diamonds occur? The distribution illustrated here shows that every continent has at least some diamond deposits on it. And the purple areas are the areas of interest, because these are the areas that date back to at least 2.5, in some cases 3 billion years. And it's below these surface rocks, then you'll notice they're only on the continents, none in the oceans. It's only on these areas then that these primary deposits occur. Now what I will develop in the next 2 minutes then is what is this primary deposit. And here's an illustration then for the evolution of the upper mantle, starting in the uppermost region, uppermost panel, I beg your pardon, then going progressively down. And I want you to stop at the penultimate one here. And what we can show now then is that the crust, the continental crust, had to come out of the mantle, and in doing so left behind a region of the mantle, in other words, the keel that is illustrated progressively here with time, that this keel then was of a different composition from the rest of the upper mantle. Moreover, we can show that that diamonds originated in that field here illustrated with the hatchet region, that diamonds were resident there for about 3.5 billion years, to be brought up to the surface later on. So in other words, the diamonds were held in what I call the safe deposit box then. The diamond graphite stability curve is curved here. This is the curvature. So we're looking at depths of about 200, perhaps 180 kilometers, and this was a region for diamond formation. Now, as Jeff Harris and others will talk about, UMass comes to the rescue again. Thanks a lot. Right. Now, we also know that there are several places on Earth in which diamonds have originated in the transition zone and in the lower mantle, and this then is an additional challenge towards distinguishing between and among deposits from different old regions of the Earth, and I didn't say what that word is. So this is a craton then, and this is a very characteristic, has a very characteristic chemistry, pointed out by Joe Boyd, Peter Nixon, and others, from the rest of the so-called asthenosphere down here. Right, so we have three regions then in which diamonds occur, those held in the safe deposit box here, those that occur in the transition zone here, and then a third population from the lower mantle. The minimum depth then at which diamonds can form, which is, incidentally, is about the distance from Amherst, which I'm sure most of you do not know about, but Boston you do know about. It's the distance, if you can get past the Big Dig, that is, it's about this distance of 180 kilometers, and it's the intersection then of the diamond to graphite transformation, which has been determined experimentally, versus the geotherm, which is the rate of increase of temperature with depth. And so this region then is equivalent to about 300 and 400 tons per square inch, and temperature is equivalent to about the melting point of iron. So the diamonds have to form deep, and the diamonds have to come to the surface very fast. Why? Because diamond is pure carbon, and carbon, the graphite then, there are three forms of carbon. Diamond is one, graphite is the second, and C60, the buckyball Buckminster fullerene, is the third. And we assume that the diamonds have to come to the surface very fast, so fast, in fact, that it has to inhibit the transformation of the diamond to graphite, and certainly has to prevent the incineration of the diamond. Carbon plus oxygen is equal to carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide. Well, what is the driving force? Now, not everyone will agree to this model, but I'm given the privilege at least of, this is a partisan model, and so I'm going to take advantage of that position, but of course I'm open to active discussion, which I have no doubt there will be. But my preferred model is that this is plume-driven, and I think we have good reasons to believe that, namely that we have to excavate diamonds from the lower mantle and from regions higher than that. Moreover, we can also show that these diamond intrusions, which is really one of the most extraordinary features of diamond, is that these are intruded synchronously throughout the Earth. And there were two major events, one at about 100 million years ago and another at about 1 billion years ago. And what these did then was, in very small areas, covering a few tens of kilometers, is that these literally drill their way through the crust to bring to the surface the host rock known as Kimberlite and the diamonds that go along with it. So this is an aerial view from Kimberley. Here is the rock, and you don't need to be a geologist to see that there's a lot of incoherency in this rock, and this attests, at least in part, to the very rapid rise that the diamonds came to the surface. And here, right on the edge, this is Kimberley, after which the host rock is named. There's a very closely related rock known as lamproite, but that is perhaps not quite as important as far as we now know, and the way that we need to be thinking, which is in this new paradigm of identifying diamonds geographically rather than geologically. But the impression I do want to give is that these caves, they had to have come through very rapidly. Just to give you some feeling, just a taste, without all of the details then, is that this is the so-called big hole in Kimberley, and the number of diamonds that were extracted from 1871 to 1914 amounted to 14 million carats of diamonds. And the amount of material that needed to be removed was 22.5 million tons. Right, the shapes of these pipes then, as you would have gained an impression, at least from the big holes that are created during volcanism. This is the main Kimberlite type, and this is typical of some lamproites, but not all lamproites. To give you a feeling once again for the amount of, you saw the amount of rock that needed to be moved for the abundance of the diamonds that are present. But essentially, the ones in southern Africa, for example, averaged between 22 and about 40, maybe 50 carats per 100 tons. By comparison, the pipes in Australia, for example, some of these gave up to 500 carats per 100 tons. Now, as you saw from the opening overhead, there are only about 50 primary deposits that are mined around the world, but there's a huge amount of material that is distributed. So this is the shape then of the Kimberlite pipe. What I want you to notice in particular is that as we go down in depth, is that these go to very narrow so-called dikes. And some of these are no wider than the avenue between the two sets of chairs here. But I've seen, on average, lots of 50-carat diamonds come out of this lower zone, particularly in West Africa. Right, so these are the sizes of the pipes then. This is the erosional level in Kimberley, and you saw the size of the pipes there. These are the sizes of the pipes here in Sierra Leone. So what we're looking at then is an erosion of about 1,500, perhaps 2,000 meters or 2 kilometers. Now, what has happened then is that these diamonds have been spread far and wide by processes of river action, for example, and the ages of those pipes then are 100 million years. So we've had 100 million years of dispersion then through these critical regions of conflict diamonds in West Africa. In this dispersion, the diamonds are then reconcentrated into conglomerates or water-worn pebble horizons such as this. Here is one in which there's a diamond in part of this agglomerate or conglomerate. So you can see that all of this has been processed from the primary pipe, and then there's one exotic and unusual place on Earth, namely in Namibia, where the ocean is effectively pushed back. Once again, the diamonds here probably are Cretaceous, but these are all secondary deposits. And the opening slide that I showed was conservatively of the order of 98, 99% a gem quality diamond. But you can see the huge operation here. And it is said also that the heavy vehicles at this locality on the Sperrgebied in Namibia is superseded only by the U.S. Corps of Engineers. Right, let's focus in now on very specifically on the geopolitical setting then of diamonds in Africa. Well, there are 4 major cratons, and the cratons then recall are the places in which the primary deposits occur, but through dispersion then is that these will clearly overlap the cratonic regions. And what I want to start off with then is in Angola, where the hot news after many years was that Mr. or Colonel Zavimbi was assassinated a few months ago, and the hope then is that at least the support that he had, and some of that was from South Africa before the downfall of apartheid, but there's another important component here, and that is the potential involvement of Al-Qaeda. Now, it took some of us about 6 hours last January to learn Washington speak, and when the comment was made, we have very good evidence for, we are confident of, we think that, it means, as my students would say, there's 110% certainty that involvement is recognized. Right, so let's look at so there were some 2,000 kimberlites then. Many of them are not diamond-bearing, as I illustrated at the outset in the Capval craton. But here's a huge craton here, and there are 2 major centers then, one in Angola, the other in the Congo Republic, previously Zaire. But an important feature here then is this region here, which is not known to be diamond-bearing. Now, what I want to point out here in addition is that these are the known diamond deposits, primary diamond deposits, but there are huge fields out to the north that are also being mined for diamonds. As illustrated here, you're not supposed to see all of the details, but I do want you to get an impression of the scale. This is 300 kilometers, and these long riverbeds down here then are all alluvial diamond deposits. Now, the chances of being able to get in to monitor those then is virtually impossible. This is a scene that was taken in 1979, and even then, this was in Liberia. Even then, there was the ever-present soldier around. The Mandingos then are typically the claim owners, and although this gentleman is Italian, he could also proxy as Lebanese because he was a diamond dealer. Right, the regional geology of West Africa is the most interesting, intriguing, and challenging one then, and all of the diamond deposits that are now known are in this Leo uplift. There have been some deposits described by Kaminsky up in Algeria, but the ones we're interested in, at least for the moment, are in this region. There's a huge basin here, oil potential, but this is the diamonds. Now, there's also an interesting region in Senegal, which is known as the East Senegal Window, where the rocks are the same age as an important group of rocks here, but no diamonds have yet been found. Now, what is important in West Africa then are these age provinces, and this was a very interesting revelation, namely that all of the known diamond deposits are limited to the Liberian age province of 2.7 million years. The older province, which reasonably should also have diamonds, is about 3 billion years, and the Hibernian province, which is somewhat younger, of about 2 billion years. The expectation might be that this would have a lower incidence of diamonds, but this should have the higher incidence. Why should that be? Because, as Steve Richardson and Steve Shirey and others have shown, is that diamonds are natural antiques, being of the order of 3.5 billion years old. Well, one possible model then for explaining that is illustrated here, and that is that the depth to which the subcratonic keel dives into the lithosphere is deeper than that even of the older ones or the somewhat younger ones. We can rationalize the younger one by saying that it's somewhat immature, and we can equally argue that the older one then had simply had its bottom keel taken off, and that the diamonds are distributed elsewhere in the mantle. Okay, now what is the significance of this from a geopolitical point of view? And the significance is that in the deeper erosional levels, the fact is that all of these are constrained to the Liberian age province, is that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of these so-called dikes. So what I talked about initially were the pipes. The characteristic feature in West Africa are these dikes, and it's within these dikes that these 50-carat diamonds are routinely found. And just a week before last, a 1,000-carat diamond was found in Sierra Leone, which led to the rifling through of both garbage and sewage to try and find additional diamonds. And in the many years that I worked in Sierra Leone, during the monsoon period of heavy rains, from young children to old people, everyone would have the Koidu stoop, okay? And they'd be walking down on trackie doing this, and sure enough, they'd be picking up large diamonds, as is the case in India from the peanut fields. Right, so here on a map scale then are the three pipes that are known in the main field in Koidu. This is in Sierra Leone. But these are the really important sources of diamonds. Here there are 4 major zones, and these literally run for 10, maybe 20, 30 kilometers. But this is where the diamonds are being then distributed into the surrounding areas. That's in Sierra Leone. The same applies in Guinea, for example, where we recognize 3 major lineaments, and these are all interlinked by these dike systems. So we're really looking at a very different type of deposit. And in the case of Liberia, then there are 3 major dike systems here. These are very much later, and these are basaltic dikes. Now, the major control then is also an interesting one in the sense that we recognize 4 major lineaments. This is a Precambrian, this is a Proterozoic, and for those of you who are not into the age frame of mind, let's just point out, this is the oldest, and note all the rivers run down here. This is somewhat younger, There's a third one, which is the Pan-African. That's about 600 million years. And then there are all of these lines going out into the oceans, and these intersect those on the continents. Now, the importance of this, then, is that we have these intersections, some of which have been active for over 600 million years, and this reactivation, then, has essentially led to the intrusion, or at least has permitted the rise of these diamonds to the surface. But from a distributional point of view and from a practical mining point of view, this is the important feature, that all of these rivers contain diamonds from areas that are spread far and wide, and some perhaps even come from as far north as Mali. The bush is intense, the bush is thick, and the answer to questions from the White House, the answer is no. It is impossible to stem the flow of diamonds at the source, because this is what one has to contend with. So diamonds flow easily, the porosity is high, the mobility is legendary, and materials move very fast. The methods are primitive. This is not a Firestone shovel, but called a 7-day shovel. And those are typically inferior. But this is the mode then, very simple digging. These are the Mali well diggers. Rather than digging a great big hole, they simply dig down to these horizons that are diamondiferous. They just dig around, build a ladder down into the gravel, and then bring the gravel rather than digging a big hole. This is one of these holes then that is partially collapsed. A lot of people die in these holes, but the motivation for diamonds then is certainly there's no consideration for life, and life is very cheap among the miners and will do to get the diamonds. In some cases, there are Lebanese operations that have supported the presence of pumps, and during the night, after Selection Trust pulled out of Sierra Leone, British Petroleum went in, and what they would do is that they would gather up all of the tools from the well diggers. They would pick up all of these pumps. They would put them into helicopters or on the back of trucks and just drop them off the back. A matter of time before all of the remnants would be assembled and the pumps would be back in operation. The method is very simple. It's that, and although this particular photograph I look at is from Brazil and not West Africa, it's exactly the same mode of operation. Some square jigs run, and the object here is to get the heavy mineral concentrate to the surface. That was a much more sophisticated operation. That throughout Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia is that the amount of concentrate that one retrieves in any one jig, so this is the material, one inverts it, and the very heart of the jig then, right here, is where one would find the diamonds. You can see, even for those of you at the back, you can see some lots of red minerals here, lots of garnet, and some ilmenite. So the place is absolutely riddled with diamonds, and of course it's euphoric when one finds a primary deposit. Look at the pamaya trees in the background. So this was April the 11th, 1980. Right. So let's finally get back then and ask the question: is there a way in which we can identify these diamond deposits, given the fact that the diamonds are old, the kimberlites are young, given the fact that the geological contexts do not correspond to geographic backgrounds? Some countries are honest and others less so. So we want to see whether we can go from here to here and essentially trace the history and path, the birthright of this particular stone, from being a raw stone to a cut diamond. Now, Jeff Harris will talk in more detail about this, but let me just introduce the subject, and that is that we do know that yellow diamonds are the result of nitrogen substitution, blue diamonds of boron. So these are dominantly from India and southern Africa. Green diamonds by radiation, those are typically have entered the sedimentary environment, but there's one deposit certainly in South Africa, namely the Finch mine, where the pipe went through a uraniferous horizon and the diamonds became green. And then my second slide showed the brown diamonds that were deformed. Now, there are diamonds whose provenance we can identify by virtue of color, and one of the rare places on Earth for these pink diamonds then is Ellendale in northwestern Australia, and there may be other places. We're also going to be hearing about photoluminescence, from Chuck McGee and others. But this is a very complex, and from Larry Taylor and Nick Sobler, very complex growth then in the diamond history. And the question is, can we use this to some benefit in order to identify diamonds? We also know, and I was very excited until the whole image was dashed by John Gurney and Judith Millage, and that is that as far as we knew until a few years ago, the only diamonds that had diamond coatings on these were those from Sierra Leone. We now know that they occur in the non-conflict areas of the slave province, paradoxically named, in which these coats also occur. So that's less than useful. The shapes of diamonds, is this a possibility to identify provenance? Well, that remains open. Now let's turn to the inclusions in diamonds. And the inclusions in diamonds, a garnet, a clinopyroxene, and have allowed us at least to identify the rocks, the primary rocks in which these occur. And here's an eclogite once again with a diamond in this environment. So we know, we have a good idea then of the rock types in which the diamonds occur, and we're also able then, with some poetic license, at least to formulate possible reactions that might take place in the upper mantle for the formation of diamonds. Peter Dines in particular, and Jeff Harris will be talking, and Pierre Kaniger will be talking about the carbon isotopic compositions of diamonds. And all I want you to note, for this slide at least, is that there are these major peaks between diamonds and between and among meteorites, proving, or at least implying, that the carbon in diamond is primordial, and it's the same carbon that you and I are made of, namely it's cosmic carbon. Right, the ages then of diamonds, as I said, there's a large population here. Yes, there are indeed some younger ones, and Steve Shirey will tell us that this is not a very useful way of identifying the provenance. Right, so now this is the challenge, ladies and gentlemen, and that is that we know a tremendous amount about the geology of these deposits. What can we say about the geography? And I would say safely at this point in time we can say very little, but I don't think that we should simply throw up our arms, or the lack thereof, as is in the case in Sierra Leone, and say there is no way. We have not been challenged as a community geographically. We've had this mindset, as Dr. Lanzarote said in the last talk. We're in this mindset geologically, and we have to change that. And I think the only way that it can be changed is to ask the question. There's a new type of question. It's a first-order question. Can we locate these geographically rather than geologically? Right. So that is that's essentially the essence of my talk, except for my conclusions, which will now follow. Now there are three methods out there, and I'm just going to flash these on. Identifying the source of conflict diamonds by virtue of the shape of the diamonds. Identifying diamonds by ion implantation, or essentially putting a fingerprint, putting a stamp on the diamond. Well, I call my friends up in New York and say, how long will it take to remove a laser in Czar diamond? And they say about 2 to 3 minutes. So I don't think that's the way. Now, Jim Shigley from the Gemology Institute of America will talk about these paper features, and I hope that he will also tell us that when we heard this talk at the White House, that we were finally told that in spite of all of the security, that even their system had been breached, having gone into the numbering and the clandestine identification then since the 1650s. The site holdings and the Bourse system assures, not ensures, but assures regional source anonymity. So this is something we have to get around, and I don't think that's going to be possible. So apart from getting funding, there are two other important things that have to happen. We have to develop a database for conflict diamond areas. And in order to get those diamonds, we will need the help and the permission of the United Nations and the help of the United States. And we will certainly need funding from the major agencies. But we need to establish a database before we can indeed proceed. Thank you very much indeed, ladies.
We have time for any questions.
Steve, you mentioned that it could be quite difficult to treat all these diamonds. As someone who's worked a lot in West Africa, do you think it might possibly be a solution to treat conflict instead? And, with the recent developments in Angola and other things in Sierra Leone?
The answer is yes and no. The answer is yes if we can contain the porous borders. The answer is, if we can contain them, the answer is yes. But I don't know how that's possible. I mean, there's evidence now in Liberia that, and there always was, I mean, people would just trade diamonds openly in the cafeterias there and in the El Mizon Hotel. But those diamonds clearly didn't come from Liberia because there were no operations, Chuck. So, yes, if we could contain and at least make sure that the diamonds, if we could contain the diamonds within those countries, the answer would be yes. Maybe it's 4%, that's the way that we should be going. But I don't know how that's possible really. But it's a good point.
More geological question. We know in Botswana, the voting level is not very deep. Alcohol brings on to the south, so considered to be kilometers of gold. How much of the great islands are removed by erosion in West Africa?
Well, the estimate, good Steve, the estimates vary from 2 up to, Sutherland, for example, believes that there's been up to 6 kilometers removed. So we're really down into the root zones of these deposits.
Virtually all of the diamonds have been transported.
Well, a large percentage of them have, but they're still, certainly in the Koidu pipe, it's still very rich, no question about that. But that's the, I think, important new realization. We've known that for years, and since Linda Tompkins and even before that did a thesis there, but we knew that, but I think it's taken on a new meaning though. And I think it's also a matter of time before these people begin to start mining off the coast.
Just the point that the oil community, the next time of erosion was essentially inland basin.
Oh, that's the other, I'm sorry, that's the other point, correct. That's right, yep.
You get down to the Sea of River, which is the river that takes back to the coast. The diamonds down there are extremely few and far between. So the main one of being this massive erosion, we didn't go anywhere.
But I pointed out the Teodini Basin to the north, and that was the point that I'd intended to come back to. Thanks, Jeff. Very good.
You mentioned the importance of creating a diamond database.
Yeah.
What sort of organizational structure do you envision, and what's the best way you think to get the process started?
Well, I think that Larry Taylor and I should be the directors of this new institute, okay? Well, I think it needs, the reason I pointed to Larry, it needs a lunar type approach. Namely, it needs a consortium approach. And I think that that's the only way that so what we need to do is to get the expertise, for example, within the lunar program, we've got a metallurgist, which seemed totally unreasonable in the form of Joe Goldstein. But to get the experts in a team to be collectively funded and to look at the same diamonds by a variety of different techniques. I mean, that's what I have in mind for being able to do this. But we need to establish this database first of all.
But to establish that,
we need the diamonds. We have to break the rules. Yeah.
Government taxes, acquiesce in the purchase of these diamonds, so that the scientists and diamonds go. So I think we will have to get technically breaking the world's law.
It turns out, rules are there and rules are to be broken. But in order, I think that the lesser of the two evils is buying diamonds from these outfits, and so that we can work on it. Can I just say one other thing? There's one other point to be made, and that is that which I make in the abstract, and I just hope that having said that, and I don't think I'm smart enough to be able to prejudge these people. But what they were doing is essentially was buying diamonds for arms. That left a paper trail. They were then trading diamonds for arms. Well, they caught a couple of arms dealers, one Czechoslovakian and the other one just down the street in Antwerp, down from the Bourse. What was then happening was we were asked if we were given a package of sharp-edged octahedral diamonds, where would we say they came from? And three of us said, these are almost certainly from Siberia. Oh, was the comment. We now think, 110% sure, we now think we know what's happening, that diamonds are being exchanged for diamonds. So large diamonds for smaller diamonds, which can be moved more easily. You can carry $1 million around in your pocket without any trouble at all. And so that's what they think. Well, I wrestled with this and I thought, okay, what's the next step? Can we predict it? And it seems to me that the most obvious thing to do is to infiltrate the cutting and polishing industry, which I think they could only do with great difficulty. But everyone has a price. The alternative to that, and I was quite shocked that I actually thought of the idea, trying to put myself into that frame of mind. What would I do? Start up my own business. I could go and get the diamonds, could polish them, cut them, polish them, distribute them, and they wouldn't need this long litany of the birth certificate. And not only that, the prices, which I didn't discuss in any great detail, the prices increase by an order of magnitude on average. So here's a way of getting a huge amount of money in an untraceable way. And I hope they don't do that. Okay, good. Thanks.